organizer with the Asian Law Alliance. Asian Law Alliance sits on another coalition called the Coalition for Justice and Accountability, which has been around for about 20 years. And because of the work that they're doing together, that's why we're here today. So a few housekeeping things before we begin today's webinar. Our chat is disabled. So if you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panelists or you have about the session in general, if you could type them into the Q&A button in the bottom, it should be in between participants and chat. That's where you can ask any of your questions, and then myself and the other panelists will address them accordingly. And then other than that, today's webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Asian Law Alliance YouTube page and will be shared on other respective medias. So please do keep that in mind that this webinar is being recorded. And I think that's it for housekeeping. So we'll go ahead and get started to kind of set a little bit of the context around why we're having this discussion today and why the Coalition for Justice and Accountability is against tasers. We do have a few videos that we would like to share with you all first. These videos are going to total about 5 minutes. They are two separate ones. One is about 1:30 and then another one is about 2 minutes. So right around 4 or 5 minutes. And these videos do contain some graphic content as well as language and visual cues. So if you feel inclined to, you are more than welcome to lower your volume or to turn your attention away from the screen for the next 4 or so minutes. But we will be sharing some content just to set the stage about why we believe tasers are a dangerous weapon. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll get things started.
Morning about a lawsuit filed against the city of Los Angeles on behalf of the family of Keenan Anderson. Now, he is the 31-year-old man who died after being repeatedly tased by police officers. NBC4's Lauren Coronado is following this story for us.
In January, attorneys representing Keenan Anderson's family filed a claim for damages, but it was denied, which is why they're here today, moving forward with a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of L.A.
We are filing a $100 million lawsuit against the law enforcement officials who caused this wrongful death.
You might remember this video from January. Police body camera footage shows 31-year-old Keenan Anderson flagging down an LAPD officer for help after a car crash in Venice. Anderson first complies with the officer's commands. Then he takes off running. Attorneys representing Anderson's family say police tased Anderson multiple times and accused the officers involved of excessive use. The LA County Coroner's Office says Anderson's death was the result of heart failure and cocaine use.
And seeing that videotape says everything I need to know to tell me that his death was wrongful. I care not what the coroner's office says in terms of his having cocaine in his system at the time of his death.
Anderson was a teacher at a school in Washington, D.C. and a father to a 5-year-old boy. He was in L.A. to visit relatives over the holidays when the incident happened. And I reached out to the LAPD for comment. A representative responded with, "The department does not comment on pending litigation." Reporting in Ladera Heights, I'm Lauren Coronado, NBC4 News.
Conclusion of our first video, we have one more that we'd like to share. And again, I would like to remind you, if the content is too graphic, you're welcome to turn your attention away from the screen or to lower the volume.
What she last time I'm going to tell you, I will tase you. Do exactly what she tells you to do.
Take one more tongue ring out and hand it to me.
Here.
It sticks with me like it was yesterday. I remember everything. I can remember the faces of the guards. I remember, what they look like. I want to go to sleep, man. I just want to go to sleep.
That's what she said.
Just let me go to sleep. I felt really embarrassed. And I felt like crap.
Listen, this is the last time.
I don't care, man.
Taser, taser.
All right. Oh.
Lay down on the ground. Lay down on the ground. Now do exactly what she tells you to do. Do not resist her in any way, or I will get you again.
Like, it hurt really bad. It burned. Like, I was on fire. Like, my chest was on fire. It hurt really bad.
Take your tongue right now.
I can't. I need something to take it out with. Slippery, I can't. What can you do? That is all you had to do. I feel like you should use a taser if someone is charging at you or threatening your life, or to get them to go down. I don't think you should use a taser for somebody that's not doing anything, unlawful. Like, I'm not breaking the law. I just couldn't get my tongue ring out. Oh my God! Why you tase me? Why you tase me?
Take your pants off.
I'm about to have a seizure, guys.
So this concludes the two videos that we're going to share. And now we're just going to jump straight into today's panel. Today we're joined by Richard Conda, Sean Allen, Raymond Goins, and Aaron James. Today's panel is also moderated by Richard Conda, and I will turn things over to him.
Thanks so much, Maven. Maybe what we'll do is let each person do a quick intro. So Sean, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sean Allen. I spent about 34 years in law enforcement here in this county. I currently sit on the executive board for the Silicon Valley branch of the NAACP, and I'm part of the Coalition for Justice and also a union leader for police, for a police union. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Raymond?
Yes, my name is Raymond Goins. I'm with Silicon Valley Debug. I'm formerly incarcerated, and I've been 42 years alive. I spent over 25 years incarcerated. I spent over 3 years in our county jail. The longest I spent in county jail was 2 consecutive years. And yeah.
Thanks, Raymond. Aaron?
Yes, Aaron James, retired public defender, spent 25 years as a public defender. I'm a member of the Coalition for Justice and Accountability and the NAACP.
Thanks, Aaron. And again, I'm Richard Conda, Executive Director of Asian Law Alliance and the Chairperson of the Coalition for Justice and Accountability. I wanted to just give some quick background on how the Asian Law Alliance and the Coalition has gotten involved with the Taser issue. So back in 2003, Bik Khao Thi Tran was shot and killed by San Jose police officer Chad Marshall. She was in her apartment. She had a Vietnamese vegetable peeler in her hand when she was shot and killed. After that tragic death, some of us began thinking about maybe there must be some other way or other method instead of her being killed. We mistakenly believed that if Chad Marshall had a taser, that somehow Bik Khao might not have died. But after really studying tasers and learning more about the use of deadly force, we began to change our mind about tasers. In fact, we heard Chad Marshall testify in court that he believed that Bik Khao Thi Tran was going to kill him with the Vietnamese vegetable peeler. And we understand that in any instance, when a law enforcement officer believes that his life is in danger, that he's going to respond with deadly force. And so that in that instance, even if Chad Marshall had a taser on his duty belt, he still would have responded by shooting her. And when they're trained to shoot, they're trained to shoot for center mass, which is basically a kill shot, shooting a person in the chest. So both Asian Law Alliance and the Coalition for Justice and Accountability have for 20 years or more been advocating against tasers, that tasers be banned. we've certainly been advocating against the use of tasers by Santa Clara County deputies. The sheriff has recently proposed that both deputies in the jails and on the streets be armed with tasers. There was a presentation made before the Community Corrections Law Enforcement Monitoring Committee. We were there, the sheriff was there, the sheriff made a presentation, we made a presentation. The committee, after listening to us and listening to the sheriff, unanimously voted that tasers should not be purchased by Santa Clara County, that they're an unsafe, deadly weapon. So we're now at the situation where the Board of Supervisors will have to make a decision on this important issue. We have recently heard that the board meeting is likely going to be in October, not in September. We don't have 100% confirmation on that, but as soon as we find out the exact date, we will certainly share that information. So what I'm going to do now is run through a bunch of questions that we have kind of developed, and I'm going to be posing them mostly to Sean, but also to Aaron as well. And we hope that through this question and answer that information about tasers will be helpful for people to understand. And one other comment, in the videos that you saw, Keenan Anderson was killed with a taser using what's called the stun or drive mode, where you push the weapon directly against a person. The woman in the jail, Miss Martini Smith, I also should note after she was tasered, she had a miscarriage. That in that instance, it was used where the probes are shot into the person. So those are the two ways that tasers are used. So just to start, Sean, I want to ask, are tasers a deadly weapon? Yes, no, why?
Yes, tasers are absolutely a deadly weapon. I mean, we've seen, the news and other media outlets showing the taser and the results, and of course the lawsuits associated with it. But even the manufacturer's warranty calls it a weapon over 90 times. And in the 8-page warning of the manufacturer's warning, it lists a number of factors that could lead to death over and over again, which would lead you not to use it if you read the manufacturer's warranty.
So Sean, why do members of law enforcement insist on calling a taser either a tool or a device instead of a deadly weapon?
The short and accurate answer is because it softens the perception to the public.
Okay. I want to direct this question to you, Aaron. 1,087 deaths by taser per the Reuters 6-part series by the end of 2018. Now we can add from 2019 to 22 another 200. Can you explain that?
That's accurate. And when I typed this out, it was actually 1,081 to be accurate. Reuters 6-part series is still up online, and you're more than able to find it and to look at it. But all of the data suggests that there is approximately 1 death a day, per week in the United States. So we took the figure of 1,081 that Reuters and they've been around for more than 100 years. They're a very, very competent journalistic organization. They came up with the figure of 1,081 through the end of their series in 2018. And we are now 219, 220, 221, and 222. And I'm not even including the deaths this year. We added another 200 to come up with the figure that I've indicated.
Thanks, Aaron. Back to you, Sean. Were tasers designed as an intermediate force weapon like batons, canines, pepper spray, and launchers, but not as a weapon to use in deadly force situations?
Yes, the manufacturer states that the taser was designed as an intermediate use weapon.
So in fact, isn't it true that tasers are neither less lethal or non-lethal, but are the most lethal by far of the intermediate force weapons? Can you explain that, Sean?
Yeah, so you have things like the 40mm grenade launchers, you have batons, pepper spray, even the police canine. When you look at those weapons that are described again as in intermediate use, the tasers kill far more people than all of them combined.
Okay, thank you. Aram, are tasers an unpredictable weapon? Can you explain that?
Certainly, when you deploy the taser, the probes can go in any kind of directions. We've seen them hit the wrong person, take somebody's eye out, a variety of circumstances. Their failure rate is about 50%. Ray Samuels, who was an extraordinary member of law enforcement, who was the chief of Little Newark, California's police department, said the following: "What scared me most about the weapon is you can deploy it absolutely within the manufacturer's recommendation, and there is still the possibility of an unintended reaction. I can't imagine a worse situation than to have a death attributed to a taser in a situation that didn't justify lethal force." And let me give you an example. I pulled over by a police officer and I don't cooperate. I don't want to sign the traffic ticket. Um, I don't have a gun or a knife, but they say, I'm going to get Aram James to comply with signing this. And they tase me. And I've got an unknown heart ailment and I die. So that's the kind of situations where tasers are routinely used in, where people die. And often tasers' answer is simply, well, it wasn't the taser that killed him. It was his heart, it was his cocaine, it was whatever. And I once said, yeah, it's like if I shoot somebody with a gun and they die, okay, and I say, well, it wasn't the gun that killed them, it was their heart, it was the cocaine, whatever, that defense is not going to fly. However, Taser says the same thing every day. Somebody gets tased, they fall backwards, they hit their head, they die, and the Taser's not blamed for it. That's public relations at its worst.
Thank you, Aram. Sean, so, considering the long 8-page warning and the taser failure rate of roughly 50%, can you talk about some of the problems for the use of tasers in the jails or in the streets?
The idea that it fails that much and the unknown medical issues surrounding an individual that the taser may be used against would lead anyone to believe and conclude that the taser is ineffective. And often, and when things are ineffective, when a use of force option is ineffective, the next option for the law enforcement officer is often to use a higher level of force.
Okay, so Sean, just to follow up a little more, so are tasers safe for law enforcement to use in deadly force situations?
No, because in a deadly force situation, a law enforcement officer is going to use a higher level of force. And to give you an example of that is there have been documented cases all over social media, and you can find all over social media where law enforcement officers have had their tasers taken away from them and they respond with deadly force, which is usually a firearm.
Okay, so are tasers safe to use on unarmed people, either in the streets or in a jail setting? If you could explain that.
No, I mean the threat of an unarmed person, it could have different levels of consequence. However, when you're looking at the other circumstances around tasing someone who's unarmed, i.e., the unknown, if they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they're standing on a surface that's not that could lead them to fall if they're running and they fall. Those things would suggest that the taser is not relevant in those situations.
So, Sean, really, is it safe to say that a law enforcement has really no safe place or space to use tasers?
Absolutely. I think the manufacturer's 8-page warning, again, if you read it, it can only lead you to that conclusion. Okay.
And Aram, can you kind of address what we call the catch-22 dilemma in terms of using a taser?
Sure. When we've studied this closely, what we've discovered is that if the taser is used pursuant to the 8-page warning, it says you can't shoot somebody in the face, in the chest, in the groin, in the eyes, and that the only safe place to tase someone is on the back or in the thigh, you'll discover that the taser is not a tool that can be used. Okay, and if a police department is properly trained, if they're properly trained, tasers, the use of tasers falls dramatically. The San Francisco Bar Association, when the city of San Francisco was to decide whether they wanted to bring tasers in, looked at different agencies that had proper training, and they discovered that, like Oakland, that had about the equivalent of San Francisco's number of tasers, and San Francisco rejected tasers away, said, hey, Oakland went down from 1,500 officers using tasers 30, 20, 10 times a year. So the more that the instructions are followed, the less the tasers are used. It's arguably an obsolete tool because, as Sean said, they're not safe. They're not safe for officers to use in deadly force situations, and they're not safe to use on unarmed people in the jail or in the street whose vulnerabilities we don't know. So this is really an obsolete tool that the county has no business trying to purchase an obsolete tool at the cost of $15 million.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So back to you, Sean. Are there training exercises that law enforcement goes through with tasers comparable to how tasers are used on community members tased on the streets or in the jails?
No, absolutely not. Again, when law enforcement officers are training in the use of tasers, you see them, the training is conducted in a very controlled environment. Typically, the law enforcement officers who's being subject to being tased is standing, kneeling, or laying flat in a prone position on a mat, and with a spotter and another human being on either side of them to protect them from injury during the taser. Meaning that protecting from the fall of an injury, not necessarily the other circumstances involved in with the taser. And that's called a controlled environment. In a jail setting or outside of a jail setting in an enforcement capacity, it is never a controlled environment. There's too many unknowns. Again, and to include someone's medical history and whether they're under influence or involved in crisis. The manufacturer warning advises not to tase people who are excited or overexerted, and all those things will be present in the capacity of an uncontrolled circumstance.
Could I follow up briefly? And also, aren't the individuals that are tased only in the back? And even in that situation, they also have goggles on their eyes.
Yeah, that's correct. In terms of police officers during training, yes, that's correct.
And now on the streets, none of those protective conditions exist. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Sean. So does the Police Executive Research Forum, which is a police think tank, recommend that members of law enforcement use tasers in training exercises? Yes, no, explain.
No, and what it's referencing is that there's been dozens, if not hundreds, of law enforcement officers injured during training, to the extent of people have lost their eyes and or damaged their eyes, I should say. And in one instance that I'm aware of, an officer had their part of their vertebrae fused due to the taser use.
Okay, and this is a little bit repetitive, but I think we need to drive this point home, Sean. So if law enforcement recognize that tasers are unsafe to use in a very controlled training exercises, does it make sense that law enforcement be allowed to use tasers on unarmed community members, either on the streets or in our jails?
It does not. If that's we're all human beings, so the same type of risk is associated with the use to any human being.
Okay. And then talking about Axon Enterprise, which is the company that manufactures tasers, when they submit their employees to taser blasts, can you talk about the controlled circumstances under which the taser is administered?
From what I've researched, the circumstances are similar, if not exactly the same as they do to law enforcement officers. And to the extent that, even with the law enforcement officers, the manufacturer makes them all sign a waiver, basically releasing them of liability in case of injury. So basically the employee, as well as the law enforcement officer, subject to the use of a taser, is on their own, or is on their own. That's the gist of it.
Okay, and Aaron, can you talk a little bit more about the waiver form that Axon requires its employees to sign before submitting to a taser blast?
Sure, and I want to bring people's attention to where I discovered this waiver form, and it's in an August 30th piece, very extensive, very critical article called Taser Maker Axon, ex-staffers say loyalty meant being tased or tattooed. So that's the loyalty that the company is looking for. However, the waiver form is an extensive waiver form that requires individuals with the company that had been pressured by the company to volunteer for a taser blast to sign a waiver. And the waiver form, according to the article, says the following: the waiver warns of the potential for death at least 12 times, according to a 219 copy of the waiver form. So everybody that signs it is doing it despite the fact that there are 12 mentions of the possible ways that you might die during that voluntary exposure.
Okay, and just to follow up a little more on that, Aaron. So does Axon actually guarantee employees that if they're injured or die during a taser deployment exercise, that they will cover medical expenses and fully compensate the family should the employee die?
Absolutely not. This is a predator corporation who says, hey, you're working for us. We'd like your loyalty. We'd love you to have an Axon taser, and we'd like you to volunteer for a taser blast. But if you die, or if you're injured, as Sean said, you're totally on your own. We're not covering you one bit. And what does this suggest to me? This suggests to me that Axon has absolutely zero confidence in this weapon, that they'd go so far to ask for loyalty from their employees, but when it's turned around on its head and somebody dies or injured on the job, they want nothing to do with it. You can't sue them. They've insulated themselves. Pretty honest.
Yeah, and talking about lawsuits, I just want to point to people's attention to a case involving Chinedu Okabe, who was tased to death by San Mateo County deputies in 2018. Early this year, the county agreed to pay his family $4.5 million. And let me point out that Mr. Okabe was unarmed. Also, Mr. Okabe was a black man. Also, another recent case involved Jim Rogers, another black man who died October 14, 2021, shocked by tasers in Pittsburgh. His family recently settled a lawsuit against the city of Pittsburgh for wrongful death for $8 million. Again, Mr. Rogers was unarmed. There are many more cases like that, but I don't want to share them. It's too much almost.
By the way, Richard, I might add that if you read Google that case, you will find out that there were 13 officers standing around when Mr. Rogers, an unhoused African-American gentleman, was tased to death. He was tased 10 times within a 4-minute time frame. And as a result of officers standing around, 6 of the officers were fired. Others were disciplined. I'm afraid that 2 of them have been rehired. But these are the kind of gruesome circumstances that we see tasers used in repeatedly.
So Aaron, we've done some rough estimation on how much that tasers will really cost the Santa Clara County if they arm all the deputies. Can you kind of share the number and how we came to that number?
Sure. When the San Francisco Bar Association was looking at the issue of tasers, they called a gentleman by the name of Michael Leonisio. This was back in 2017. Michael Leonisio was a member of the Oakland Police Department, and when he retired, he became an expert witness on the subject of tasers. He estimated that tasers would cost the city of San Francisco somewhere between $8,000 to $10,000 per officer. And he determined this based on the initial purchase price, the expense to maintain them and repair them, training, and oversight. So Sean Allen, who was with the Sheriff's Department for 34 years, told me that there are approximately 1,500 sheriff deputies in Santa Clara County, and that the sheriff intends to arm all of them. If you multiply 1,500 times 10,000, you come up with the figure of $15 million. Now, the sheriff's not going to admit to that number in front of the Board of Supervisors because they want to pretend like it's a whole lot less money that we're going to be spending on these deadly weapons. But the truth is, you do the math based on the articles that we've read that are contained in the articles that we've written, as well as the San Francisco Bar Association article.
Thanks, Aaron. Sean, can you address the racial genocidal component of Taser usage?
Yeah, so throughout the use of force continuum, and tasers being no exception, the use of force on Black and brown people is disproportionate in many jurisdictions. And so specifically when you've seen the deaths associated to the use of tasers, it's largely Black men. There's disproportionately Black men. And so that's impacting a culture of people, of course, and which is unacceptable.
Okay, thank you. And Aaron, can you kind of comment on the culture at Axon Enterprise?
Yes, and again, I read all of this in the article that it was published just on August 30th. And so Axon Enterprises maintains a sexist culture where women are called vaginas, and men who don't want to go along with being tattooed or tasered are called pussies. It's a replica of the ugly police culture where showing loyalty is a priority. And if you want to remain employed, you're going to have to go along with their program. But there's no commitment demonstrated going in the other directions. Employees are pressured to be tased in a controlled setting to show loyalty. But the same employees must also sign the waiver that I talked about, giving up the right to recover for injuries or death. Axum does not have their employees' backs. They also engage in what we'd call fraternity or hazing exercises. And the use of the tattoo was described in the article often, again, like a fraternity or a police culture kind of mentality. I don't believe that Santa Clara County should be doing business with an organization that has such a despicable culture. Thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Sean, can you kind of talk about the number of inmates each sheriff deputy is responsible for in the jail, and what risk would be involved if the deputy was armed with a taser?
Yes, sure. The ratio has historically been anywhere from 60, one deputy to anywhere from 60 to 96 inmates are incarcerated per people. And the risk associated with that is, with putting a taser in that environment, if it's used, or having the officer possibly having the taser taken away from them and put it in the hands of someone who's untrained and who's unaware of the manufacturer warnings, could likely, again, increase the risk of great bodily injury or death in the hands of, when it's in the hands of an untrained person, just as much as it would be as in the hands of a trained person. Typically, when you see physical confrontations in the jail with regards to staff and incarcerated people, and typically, I should say, at times, there has also been a retort from the person being, they fight back. In other words, the force is being used against, and again, you'd end up in a struggle where the person being tased, or even people who are close to that person or associated with that person, attempt to take the device or the weapon from the officer.
Okay, our last question to you, Sean, is, so in the 8-page warning, in the September 2022 8-page warning, is there a specific warning not to use tasers for the purpose of torture? And what is the implication of this warning?
But when I read that, clearly the implication is that there is a possibility that someone can use this particular weapon to torture another human being. And then that again is unacceptable.
Okay, so now to you, Raymond. You've heard a lot of this information, and we've discussed this in detail before. We just want you to share your thoughts, your reactions in terms of, what would happen if sheriff deputies in the jail or sheriff deputies on the street were armed with this deadly weapon. Go ahead, Raymond.
In my community, I could tell you that if the sheriffs are armed with this deadly weapon, with this taser, members of my community are going to be fearful. Like Sean said, of the torture apparatus, it's the fear that the police or the sheriffs have additional weapons to kill us with, to torture us with. I've been in county jail for 2 years. I spent a lot of my life incarcerated, and I've seen abuse from, I guess, overseers, starting in juvenile hall all the way to prison. I hit all three phases of the judicial system. I hit juvenile hall, I hit county jail, and I hit prison. And in each phase of my incarceration, I've seen people who are entrusted with us to in check abuse their position of power. In juvenile hall, I've seen kids, 14, 13, 12-year-old little kids come in with dog bites all over them, all over their face, all over their neck, all over their arm. And this is, and for us, that's normal behavior because we're all kids and there's more than one of us big. But now as an adult man, I seen that it was this criminal punishment that for any sheriffs to stick any dogs like a slave, put tight manacles around our ankles and our wrists, tight so much where I still have scars on my ankles and my wrists from these handcuffs. And then when you get in the elevator, it would be like 6 or 7 big football playing looking individuals who putting gloves on and tightening the gloves on so they could beat on you as soon as those jail doors close. As a person who deals with mental illness and is predisposed to genetics to deal with mental illness, I would fear that if I have a mental health breakdown and albeit my wife calls for help and the sheriffs come and I get tasered and I have an unknown heart condition or mental condition, medical condition that I don't know about and I die. Or I go to county jail and in booking, they taser me because I seek mental health treatment. Like the lady we seen in the video who just couldn't take her tongue ring off. Like that's an everyday occurrence. That's not an exception to rules. That is the rule. We speak about Taser's deaths, right? But from my point of view, I've seen personally that people in jail, we don't die from the actual weapon. We die because of the weapon. So if you taser somebody in a cell, say, picture your bathroom. Picture your bathroom, but take away the porcelain toilet and put a steel toilet. Take away the porcelain sink, put a steel sink. Throw in a steel bed in there with sharp corners. Now imagine what would happen when you're tasered and you lose all function of your bodies. Where's your head going to line? Is your head going to bust your head on the corner of that bed? And you may die from a brain hemorrhage. They're not going to tell you or tell the public, Mr. Goins died from resulted from being tasered, thus he fell and he hit his head. They're going to tell you Mr. Goins died from brain aneurysm or brain damage. So the effects of the taser in that situation is not something that my community wants or desires or needs. It's just there's nothing that could come out from having them police or them sheriffs in the county jail with tasers. I used to laugh all the time. The sheriffs are criminals. They're more criminals than the actual criminals who are in jail because they're the ones who sworn to hold the badge, but yet they're the same ones breaking the laws. I went to the board hearing and I heard the sheriff say, Mr. Wilson asked the sheriff, how could you know everybody's medical condition before you taser them? He said, we know everybody's medical condition. And I know firsthand that from being in jail, there's no way the sheriff can know our medical condition unless he's opening a meeting to violating every inmate's HIPAA laws. There's just absolutely no way. Medical in county jail and sheriff are two completely different entities, not one of a kind. So for him to openly admit, like, yeah, we violate inmates' HIPAA laws, I was told by a sheriff that you're a criminal, not to trust a criminal. So to hear a sheriff say, admit to being a criminal and violating the laws, to say we want tasers, for me, is very troublesome. I couldn't implore you enough, I'm saying, about the damage that'll be done. Just even in the communities where I live in East Side San Jose. I live in a poverty-stricken area, and I can tell you that my neighbors wouldn't call the police if they know they had tasers on them, in the fear that they're going to be tasered. For those who say that tasers are good, tasers are needed, you shouldn't commit crimes. Well, I ask you, I'm saying, what if your loved one is mentally ill? Do you have any loved ones who are mentally ill? Did anybody in your family? How would you like it if they die from having a mental health breakdown and the sheriff shows up and kills them because of a taser? I know you may think that may not happen to my loved ones, but trust me, it does. And don't be one of those people who wait to happen to your loved ones to start complaining about it. Like, get ahead of the curve. It's not something that we need in our county at all.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you. Appreciate your sharing. I guess we've reached a point, even if there are certain questions that we want to address from the folks attending, we can do that.
So again, I would just like to remind everyone that if you do have any questions for our panelists or questions about tasers in general, you can type them into the Q&A section and then we'll go through them. We have about 15 minutes left altogether. So we'll start working our way through here. I see some great commentary from Paul Soto, acknowledging and agreeing with the comments given by Sean today. So that's great. And then we have a question from Susan Hayase that says, it looks from many news items and videos of taser usage that they are used on unarmed persons in order to coerce behavior unnecessarily or to punish unarmed persons, often in a vindictive manner. Is this in violation of how law enforcement says that tasers are a de-escalation tool?
I mean, I'll just address it. I mean, to me, it's the ultimate lie to say that a taser is a de-escalation tool device. It's a weapon that can kill. So in that instance, if it can kill and has killed, I don't understand how it can be defined as a de-escalation tool. De-escalation means somebody who's trained in de-escalation in crisis intervention, to kind of talk a person down, to use the skills that they have. And I don't know, Sean, if you wanted to address that a little further in terms of your years of experience as a member of the law enforcement community.
Well, in short, every weapon that's associated to police officers in general is a weapon of compliance, with the exception again being the firearm. The firearm is a weapon that can lead to great bodily injury or death, and the taser is in that category. It's not a weapon I would trust to just gain compliance. There's an undeniable risk of death in every instance of where the taser is used.
Thank you. We have another question from Tremaine Hunter. It says, when is this being proposed to be implemented?
I'll address that, Dylan. So we thought that the meeting next Tuesday of the Board of Supervisors was going to be when the sheriff was going to present it for their consideration. We have since learned that it's not going to happen next Tuesday, but likely some date in the future in October. We're not 100% sure of the date. We've heard kind of rumblings that it could be like October 17th, but that's not a confirmed date. We will know for sure by Wednesday night if it's going to either be on the agenda for next Tuesday or not. I'd say based on the information we gathered, it's 90% chances it will not be on the board agenda next Tuesday.
As a follow-up to that, if you follow along with ALA social media, we'll continue to post updates about what's going on with the Board of Supervisors, as well as keep up some education and campaign materials regarding this. And there will also be a list of resources and other things that will be shared with the attendees today. I think another interpretation of this question could also possibly be, when is it being proposed that tasers are implemented in the jails, as in not when is it being heard by the Board of Supervisors, but the timeline for when the sheriff would like to see tasers in jails?
Well, I mean, the Board of Supervisors needs to either approve it or not approve it. If they approve it, then it would be sometime in the future. I don't know when. They would need to have a full-blown policy on usage and whatever. So as far as exactly when they could be on the streets and in the jails, I don't think we could say, but the first thing would be the board needs to make a decision on whether to arm the deputies with tasers or not. Because at this time, there are no tasers either in the jails or on the streets. The Santa Clara County deputies do not have tasers on their duty belt. No.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the community? Oh, I see another one. Okay. Another question from Susan Hayase says, Antioch police officers have been shown to vindictively punish persons with police canines, especially Black people. How can the SCC sheriff guarantee that sheriffs will never use tasers like this? How would this be prevented? And how could safety guidelines be enforced?
I want to answer that. You can't prevent it. They're going to use it vindictively as much as possible. A policy and practice and training doesn't mean nothing to the sheriff's department and the people who are just in charge of the correctional facilities. They could train all they want. They're going to come training and implementation of the training is two different things. They will get trained, come to work and shoot us with the tasers and laugh about it. And then hope that in the midst of us seeing tasers and flopping around, we hit them so that way they get paid leave for being injured on the job. That's how that will work.
And I might add, we had a meeting today on tasers earlier in the day. And a couple of things. One, the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, one of the few agencies in the Bay Area that refused to release the demographics of the 80 canine bites that their department has been responsible for over the last 5 years. Similarly, when you look at Mike Jananko, the Office of Criminal Justice and Law Enforcement Monitoring regarding the use of the 17 times that the tear gas was used in the jails over the last year or so, same thing. No disclosure of the demographics. And that's despite the fact that we now have a very robust Racial Justice Act in the state of California that requires just that kind of disclosures so that folks can understand the disparity in the way that use of force is used in this state and across the country.
And to add to that, there's a lot of risk associated to tasers, as we've talked about tonight. The other issues surrounding what the sheriff wants. He's selling this to the public. He's selling to the board supervisors as with the promise of transparency and accountability. And so, he's saying that, when you draw the taser, that the taser will activate cameras of all the employees within close proximity of the person who draws the taser out. But he's not saying is that the camera policy for the sheriff's office allows deputies to retract and remove camera footage that's been stored with the approval of their supervisor. What he's not saying is that there are people walking around without cameras on intentionally. And I've seen supervisors damaged or supervisors that have had cameras that they claim to be damaged and not wear them for over a year. So you don't have accountability there. You have a weapon that's inherently unpredictable in terms of its use and the results of its use. And then you have an agency that has a history of not being held accountable and not being transparent. And you have a sheriff that hasn't implemented any changes since the last sheriff was there to create that kind of change that's necessary and needed.
And I might add, Sean, that we've all made California Public Record Act requests that require the sheriff to release the videos, even when they have been properly recorded, and they have obfuscated and delayed, so we don't get to actually ever see a lot of these videos that we should be entitled to, that the taxpayers pay for.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have a few more questions. Another one says, why, if usage according to the safety guidelines results in reduced usage by other law enforcement agencies, why would Sheriff Johnson be so enthusiastic to use tasers in Santa Clara County?
I'm going to give part of the response. The Coalition for Justice and Accountability, NAACP, and DBUG, and a number of other groups put on debates, one during the primary race for sheriff in this county, and one for the final race in November. And at both of those debates, Robert Johnson said we didn't need tasers. Okay, they were an inefficient weapon, and they weren't necessary. He said the same thing about police canines. He said we should have therapy dogs and not canines that kill people. Well, he doesn't seem to be a man of his word.
Yeah, I think from a ex-inmate standpoint, the sheriff department is continuing the stat quo of Lori Smith, who obviously who was convicted and lost her job. For him to come in and still push her agenda while he's in the same position she was, I wouldn't trust it at all, because as an ex-criminal, I know that if I fall and my friends don't come in and keep the same agenda, I still have ties to the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department doesn't, they don't, they say things and do things, but they're criminals. They're criminals that, because they wear a badge don't mean they're trustworthy.
And then another question coming from Charlotte Casey. Is there any city in the county whose police department currently uses tasers?
Unfortunately, every other city in the county of Santa Clara uses tasers. The sheriff's department is the only agency, but of course it's a huge one, that does not have tasers.
So I think maybe an important distinction here when we're talking about who has tasers and who doesn't have tasers on the streets is each city, each municipality in the county, the street officers, the PD department, police department, they, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, do have tasers on their belt. However, the sheriff deputies, which sits as almost like a separate bracket above the police department, which are countywide officers, that agency of law enforcement does not currently have tasers in our county. However, the city police departments, those officers do have tasers.
Yeah, and so sometimes it's, well, you know, all these other agencies have it, so why can't we have it too? I don't think that's a good argument. I mean, to me, the tasers are deadly weapons that kill. It's not appropriate for any law enforcement agency to have it. So that's why we're arguing strongly against the Santa Clara County deputies having tasers, either in the streets or in the jail.
You know, I think a lot of people assume law enforcement needs to have all these different weapons, and you can look at the 2021 Department of Justice report in terms of use of force that it was released last year. It indicates that more experienced and older officers use force a lot less. And so what that tells me as a professional is that there is nothing more impactful within use of force continuum than the presence of an officer and effective communication skills and effective problem solving skills. The need for the weapons and multiple weapons over and over again often causes things like, for example, as we know, you look at the issue that happened in Alameda County a few years back with the officer who shot Officer Mesley shot and killed the African American officer, where he claimed to be mistaken his taser for his firearm, or firearm for his taser, I should say. And that's happened in other instances throughout the country. We have in the community of law enforcement, we have a younger officer who are capable. They need to gather that experience, and they also need to be trained. So, one of my definitions of misconduct associated behavior in law enforcement is all police misconduct is a product of poor leadership and training, and leadership controls the training. So there is no disconnect when it comes to that specifically. Thank you.
So Richard, you know this quote well, but I wanted to add that the progression of increasingly restrictive warnings issued by Taser has led some police agencies to either shelve tasers altogether or not to purchase them at all, having reviewed the extensive warning. Ed Davis, the former Boston police chief from 2006 to 2013, and ultimately declining to purchase tasers for his department, said the following: "The warnings, quote, made the weapon impractical to use, and it gave a lot of us the impression that we weren't getting the full story. I didn't want to take the risk. The potential litigation costs absolutely were a factor." And one other quote on that same page, the question as to whether or not officers even pay attention to their training. There was a gentleman, another Black gentleman, that was killed, and one of the officers was deposed, and she said the following: "Under oath at a deposition, one of the three officers involved in the death, Corporal Tiffany Bratton, acknowledged that she was aware of the manufacturer's warning. In a chilling statement, she said the following: 'If I read and abided by every single warning, I would not taser anyone.
That's great. Thank you, Aram. And then we have one last question from the community as we come to a close here. And I think this is a great question. Will the implementation be voted on by the public? To me, the public is not informed with the truth on these topics, therefore not able to make informed decision on them. And that comes from Michelle Hunter.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is an issue that's going to be decided by the Board of Supervisors at this point. It's not something that's going to be on the ballot. So the question or the issue or the challenge we have is we need to convince our board members that tasers kill, tasers are deadly weapons, and have no place either on the streets or in the jail. So, and before I close this, I just want to remind people that there's another issue that's related to jails, tear gas in the jails. And we recently learned from a report how tear gas is being used in really inhumane situations where really a person is having issues with medication and they get tear gassed. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So there's going to be a meeting this coming Thursday at 10 o'clock. It's a meeting of the Community Correction and Law Enforcement Monitoring Committee. It'll be at the County Board of Supervisors chambers at 70 West Heading. We're asking people to show up to that meeting, express outrage in terms of the use of tear gas on folks in the jails. And I'll close with that remark.
Sorry,
Richard,
one more thing. I'm sorry. So relating, just kind of coming back to Michelle's question, as Richard said, unfortunately, this is not an issue that's going to be coming to ballot. However, you can still voice your opinion and your support or non-support for the implementation of tasers at the Board of Supervisors meetings. And how you're able to do that is by participating in public comment. And so these meetings happen in person, but they also have a Zoom attendance option. And then you are also able to submit a written comment if you are not able to commit to the time either in person or virtually. And so if you follow along on ALA social media, we'll continue to keep the community updated about this issue, as well as how you can get involved in terms of sharing public comment and addressing the Board of Supervisors directly and being able to voice your opinion on this important issue. And that will be the same for the tear gas. We'll continue to update the community regarding that on our media. So if you please follow along with us as we go through this campaign, we would really appreciate that. And then that is it for our community questions, and I'll turn it back over to Richard.
So Aaron, did you have a closing remark you wanted to make?
Only that I wish that the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors email addresses are put up somewhere so that anybody that wants to write their view on whether we should purchase tasers can express it directly by way of an email.
Yeah, we'll do that. And I wanted to just thank Sean, Raymond, and Aram, Maylin, and Mengna for helping us put this webinar together. Particularly to Raymond, we really sincerely appreciate your honesty and your sharing in terms of your experiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.